final beatitude comes from Matthew 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus saved this one for last, and it's easy to see why. Initially, he addressed people's needs: poorness of spirit, mourning, meekness, a hunger and thirst for righteousness. And he urges them and us not to lose hope. Remember, we will be comforted, we will be satisfied. And remember our inheritance, not only of this earth, but of the kingdom of heaven. There is hope in the midst of need. Then, halfway through, he reminds us this hope should translate into action, showing mercy, keeping our hearts pure, becoming peacemakers, embodying the attributes of our Father, and being identified as his children. In the first half, we're blessed by remembering the promises of God. In the second half, we are blessed by actively living out the image of God. Now, this last beatitude is no different, but it has what actor Michael Caine referred to as the sting in the tail. It turns out that imaging God in this world means persecution from this world. Turns out that there's a price to be paid for doing what's right, especially when it comes up to standing up to the unjust and the unmerciful. When we come along and say things like, what you're saying is inconsistent and untrue, or what you're doing is wrong and it needs to stop, or even choosing to do the right thing when the wrong thing is so popular, we can't expect that there will be no pushback. People with a vested interest in the wrong thing will guard their investment, whether it's emotional, relational, ideological, financial, or a simple matter of convenience. Jesus' clashes with religious authorities are legendary. Read Matthew 23 sometime. From the priesthood right down to the thought police wannabes, he called out everyone when it came to hypocrisy and oppression. He caught a lot of heat for that, and he warned his disciples to expect the same. In John 15:20, he tells them, "Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also." Persecution is scary. Oppression is scary. There are times when we know we ought to speak up and do what's right, but we can't find the words or summon the will to take action. And we're afraid of being hurt, so we freeze up, acquiesce, and walk away angry and saddened, wishing furiously that we could have a do-over. Come to think of it, wouldn't it be great if life had do-overs? Or at least a safe rehearsal space of some kind, or just in case this happened again? Well, maybe there is. Enter Brazilian dramatist Augusto Boal. He was concerned about breaking patterns of oppression in society. But part of this involved understanding where oppression can come from. Now, Boal loved the theater, but he recognized that the theater establishment can actually be used as a tool of oppression. Since the raw material for theater is human behavior, theater can be used to impart values. This is how we learn, by watching the stories of others. Who gets rewarded for thinking and acting correctly? What's the punishment for those who do not? And what if the oppressors are the ones producing these stories, dominating the narrative so that we will act in their best interests? He also believed that traditional theater teaches passivity. In his book, Theater of the Oppressed, Boal wrote this about the establishment theater. The world is known, perfect or about to be perfected, and all its values are imposed on the spectators, who passively delegate power to the characters to act and think in their place. In so doing, the spectators purge themselves of their tragic flaw, that is, of something capable of changing society. A catharsis of the revolutionary impetus is produced. Dramatic action substitutes for real action. Again, Boal was not anti-theater, not at all, but he wanted his audience members to reject the role of passive spectators who simply accepted everything that they were shown. If theater does impart values, perhaps it could also move us from passivity to critical action. So many of his theatrical events were designed to help people recover their will to act. One method Boal developed is called the breaking of repression. Participants are asked to share from their lives a true story in which they were oppressed and chose to go along with their oppressors, even if it meant acting against what was right. This was actually a moment of repression as they held themselves down by choosing to go along. In so doing, they rehearsed their own compliance, and a cycle of defeat was established. To break that cycle, participants reenacted these scenes from their lives. They act as their own protagonists, and a team of actors take on the roles of their oppressors. Together, they create a dramatic scene of the event, the same oppression, the same repression, the same emotional residue. Then they play the scene again. But this time, while the actors retain their oppressive stance, the protagonist is allowed a do-over, a chance to say what they wish they'd said before, and do what they wish they'd done before. Now, they're still going to lose the encounter because oppressors are going to oppress. But that doesn't matter. A cycle is being broken. They've rehearsed how to speak up. And what they learn may help in real life when oppression happens again. Now, this is just one of the many techniques pioneered by Augusto Boal. And if you're interested in learning more, you can check out his book, Theater of the Oppressed. Now, full disclosure, much of his early work was influenced by Marxist ideology, and I have serious questions about the ethics of some of his practices, which to me feel like covert social engineering. I could be wrong. I'm still learning. But I think it's a mistake only to listen to people that we already agree with. There's little growth in that. There is virtue in engaging critically and respectfully with those outside of our circle. Turns out that I do agree with Boal on a couple of points. Theater and entertainment can be used for social conditioning, and we should engage actively and critically with the stories that we encounter. And I can't help wondering, would a tool like the breaking of repression help us to practice standing firm in the face of persecution? To go beyond merely passively waiting for God's deliverance, but to persevere in showing mercy, keeping our hearts pure, acting as peacemakers in spite of persecution, and setting our sights on the kingdom of heaven, actively living out the image of God. What do you think? Well, let's talk about it in class.